Hi again. I would try to explain why we divide by n-1 when we are calculating the sample standard deviation or sample variance. Now, let's think about that we have a population. There's a daily production of, let's say, 100,000 items. So, as we said before, because we cannot measure all the items, we need to take a sample. If we were to measure all the items, we would find that the average of what we're measuring will be equal to mu, and the standard deviation on the variance would be sigma square. So these are the symbols for the population mean and the variance. Now, since we're taking a sample, random sample from the population, this is population. So we take a random sample of size n, small n, we symbolize as n, and when we measure the numbers, the values, our average would be x bar, and our standard deviation of the sample would be small s. So these are the symbols we use for population, and that's the sample. Now, when we're calculating the variance of the population, as we said before, we divide the differences xi minus mu square and total divide by big N, and we have the big N for the population, which is here 100,000. So that's the variance of the population. When we calculate the variance of the sample, what did we say? S square is equal to total of xi minus x bar is the sample mean, square total divided by n minus 1. So why don't we divide by n but n minus 1? Let's think about the population distribution. Generally, the population production distribution is normally distributed. So let's draw the curve, normal distribution curve. If it is normally distributed, we would expect that the mean would be mu, and the variation would be 3 standard deviation sigma to the right and 3 standard deviation to the left. So, what was the percentage of 1 sigma? It was approximately 68%, and 2 standard 96, and 3 standard 99.7. Now let's try to listen this place very carefully. This is the population. When we were to draw a sample, what is the probability of drawing a sample from the middle? As we said, it is 68 or 96%. So the probability of choosing a value near to mu is high. So we generally select from the values near to mu. It is so rare to draw a value from very extreme points. Although we find these extreme points in the population, it will be so rare to find those points when we draw a sample from the population. So, what does this mean? We would be taking a random sample, mostly from this area, which means that our distribution of the sample would be less than the population distribution, because we mostly, since the probability is high to take a sample, random sample from here, the sample's distribution would be less than the population's distribution. The variance would be less than that. So, in order for the sample variance to guess the population variance, since this value is shorter than the population value, we divide by n minus 1 so to correct the sigma square. When, let's say, there is a value on the in the numerator, when you divide by 9 and when you divide the same number by 10, which one is greater? This one is greater. So, when you subtract 1 from n, this value would be higher than this value. So it would most probably estimate the population variance. Now, you may maybe ask, why do we subtract 1 but not 2, 3, 4, 5? That's a good question, and there's an answer. Now, let's say that we have x1, x2, x3, and xn equal to some value, let's say a. Now, what can you say for x1? Any number. For x2, any number. For x3, any number. Since total is known, which is a, if you determine these three, this is not free of giving any value other than a minus x1, x2, x3, which means that the degrees of freedom is n minus 1. What does that mean? We have 4 values, 4 minus 1 values. We can freely set a value. We are free to say to x1 anything we want, free to say to x1 anything we want, free to say to x3 anything we want, but after we're saying something, we are not free to say anything for xn other than n minus x1, x3, x2. So this is not free of value, which means that n minus 1 degrees of freedom is explained like this. So this is why we divide by n minus 1. I hope it's a little bit clear. Thanks.